Welcome back. We are so excited to be here with our listeners again, and I'm so excited to be here with you again. It's been a while.
It's been a long while. As we were getting set up and shuffled around, I thought, I feel like I'm doing something new because it's been a while since we've sat down here. So
it has been.
I'm glad we're doing this.
It's nice to be back, though.
I agree.
So I get to bring the topic today, and I'm bringing a topic that came from a book that I was reading called the Screwtape Letters. And you said you were familiar with this book.
I haven't read the book, but I'm familiar with the book.
Okay. So it was written by C.S. Lewis, I think originally in the 40s.
Yes.
And it sounds really strange, but I'm going to give you this background of what the book is because it goes into this topic today. And you kind of need to understand the background of the book. But so the book is about two evil beings. I don't know exactly what their role is. One of the evil beings he's over the charge of a human. And he is trying to distract the human from coming to know God. And then when the human comes to know God, to pull him away from the faith. The other one who's writing the letters is like the mentor for this younger being, is how they present it. And so he's explaining to the younger evil being the nature of humans. But it's in C.S. Lewis style, it is based in biblical foundational truths. And it has been so interesting to me to read human behavior from the standpoint of somebody who's trying to pull me away from the Lord. And one of the parts in the book said that it's good that he thinks his conversations are only with inside himself. So the evil thoughts he's having about somebody, the annoyances he's having about somebody else, he thinks it's only within himself and not affecting anybody else. He's a new believer, and he's saying this is really beneficial, use that. And when I read that, Nicole, I was immediately confronted with thoughts that I've had, times that I make a story out of something that hasn't happened, and how that has affected when I respond to somebody else. And even this week, Ken and I had a situation where we had a miscommunication. And he was getting frustrated with me, but he was misunderstanding the reason I had said what I had said and done what I did. He took it in a different way than I intended it. And it reminded me of this story because he was having this conversation within his own mind about what was happening. And I brought it to his attention and I was like, I do the same thing. Why do we default to this negative narrative around the person or what happened and how that can break down relationships? And that's what I wanted to talk about today. One, realizing that we do this, realizing that this is a thing, people, human nature, it's not a guy thing, a girl thing. It's not even an adult thing. Kids do this. How we create stories in our head. And then, two, what do we do to stop it? Because first we have to acknowledge it, but then how do we change that? Because it sometimes feels like you can't change the thoughts that you have. So that's where we're going to go. That's our roadmap for today.
Okay.
But I wanted to put that out there to you. And what is your experience with creating stories in your head that haven't happened yet?
Okay. So I would like to say that I'm a recovering storyteller. Like that I used to do it all the time. But the truth is I still do it. The only thing is I've become better at recognizing it when I'm doing it. And it doesn't mean that the story doesn't start taking life a little, but then I start being able to call it for what it is. And that is, I mean, that's a skill that I'm continuing to try to hone. And I try to help my coaching clients with it too, because it helps you all around the board. It helps you become a more conscious thinker if you're able to call something what it is in the moment. Then you get to shift from that. I used to, okay, let's just say I still create stories in my head. And one of the things I love that where the Screwtape Letters really recognizes that is that's what the enemy wants us to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's like, yeah, you need to go with that. It's okay that you keep it in your head. It's almost like it's not a improper or sinful thought, or as long as if it doesn't come out of your mouth, then it doesn't count. Mm-hmm. Like that's kind of where the enemy was speaking into him, right? Like, it doesn't count. Keep having those thoughts. But first off, that's not biblical. But it also is so incredibly unhealthy, because those thoughts take us down roads of anger and resentment. They cause us to make behavior choices, lifestyle choices. I mean, it's literally going, you'll either turn right or left. You may turn the wrong direction because of the thought that you're having in your head, when if we're justifying it by saying it's okay as long as it stays in your head, you're still making your moves in life from the thoughts that are in your head.
Absolutely. And the words that you use and how you approach somebody is all based on these thoughts that we're having that we think are private because they're inside of our head and we're not saying these words, but they are coming out in the way that we do speak.
Think about our kids.
Yeah.
Tone, eye roll. Like in their mind, they didn't say anything because that would be disrespectful if they said something, but they'll do the eye roll because that's coming from the thoughts that they're having in their head. So you're right. It starts when did our kids start having the eye roll? Stop doing the temper tantrum out loud because they've learned that that's an improper behavior. So therefore, they're going to keep the negative emotions they're feeling in their head. I would almost say that the thoughts that we have in our head that do guide our steps, there's no doubt about it, are more damaging than the way that we live our lives out. Like, we can do more damage with our thoughts that lead us to different choices in our life than actually we're doing as stepping forward and doing things publicly.
Yeah. Well, your thoughts plant seeds in your heart. And if you allow those thoughts to stay there, you are really letting some nasty stuff fester in your heart that's going to lead to anger and bitterness, resentment. And as I was thinking about this and the topic for today, it reminded me of a friend that I have who was going through a very difficult time in her marriage where her husband had had an affair. And they were going to counseling, and I was her person. So after counseling, she would talk with me about what happened per the counselor's recommendation. And then she would say, this is what he's told me. If I have a bad moment this week, I can call you and you're supposed to tell me this advice. It was a really, really, really tough situation. Well, one thing that he said to her was, stop making memories in your head of things that didn't happen. So she's in counseling. She wants to move past it. Her husband wants to move past it. They want to grow past it, But she realized when he said that, she was envisioning them together. She was envisioning how they spoke to each other. He would speak to her in a way, and she would think, did he talk to her that way? And she said, I realized in that moment, I kept creating images in my head of them together. And it didn't matter how much counseling we went to. I could not move past it because that's what I kept putting in my head. And if we're honest, those negative thoughts sometimes feel good for some reason for us to think about, angry thoughts to dwell on.
I think it's because they give us a false sense of control. Like if I can envision it, if I feel like I've got it, I understand what happened, or I understand what's going on, or I understand what someone else is thinking, then I have control over the situation. So it's just this false sense of control.
And maybe also a reason to validate their feelings. Like, I should feel angry. I shouldn't love somebody or serve them this way because they've hurt me. If you keep playing it over in your head, worrying about your children, if they're making life decisions that you know are dangerous, or setting them up for failure, and it's really easy with them for us to think about how that's going to play out down the road, and then get stuck in a what if situation that hasn't happened way down the road. And then what happens? We get stuck in angst and fear and anxiety. And then when we approach them about it, we're coming at it with all these emotions, like there's a force behind it. And they're like, chill out, Mom, I'm just doing whatever. Because to them, it's not a big deal, but we've created this big story of where it could go down the road. And do it with friends too. You know, everybody has insecurities. And if you think somebody is talking about you when you leave a room, what do you start doing? You start imagining, what could they be saying about me? What does this conversation sound like? What would they be picking apart? When they might not even have said one thing about you when you leave. But then that puts you in an insecure state. It makes you more distant, and it breaks relationship. That's what all of this does. All of this is breaking relationship.
I was on a text thread the other day, and there was 4 of us or 5 of us that were making a business decision on this text thread. And some opinions got thrown out. Some letters were capitalized amongst the text. Somebody else then took it personally, as if there were it. And luckily, there was one person in that text thread, and it was not me, that said, we need to take this to Zoom and have a conversation, because I believe that I'm reading this with emotion that might not even exist. And he was right.
Wow. Yes.
He was right. We all got on Zoom together, and there was no conflict. But if you went through and read the text thread, you would think there was conflict. That is a huge part of, I would say right now, even more so since we're meeting less in person, that miscommunication through email or through text messaging, and then stories get created of how we think what they must think of us, what they're thinking about us, gets drawn into that. And of course, if we really look into the way that story was written, wouldn't the enemy just want to sit there and be so incredibly happy on what was happening? This was literally working to his advantage by the stories that every member on that text thread was starting to create in their head about how someone else was feeling. And when we were able to come together, that was a complete miscommunication. It was smooth conversation from the time that we were able to gather together to talk. And I thought to myself, man, this right now, text threads, emailing, a wonderful technological advance for us to be able to communicate as a society. Also an incredible tool for miscommunication.
Oh, text get taken out of context all the time. All the time. And sometimes I don't know why somebody's upset, and then I'll look back at the way I sent a text. Sometimes it's the lack of words, the shortness in the response, and you're like, oh, okay. I was just responding quickly. My apologies. But that is exactly what happened in the book, is what what you're describing is how they were seeing it as a win for him to stay in this place of having these internal thoughts. And then what that led to was, well, she always does this. She always does that. She knows I don't like this, and she just wants to push my buttons. And so the female in the story that the guy's getting mad about, we don't know her motive. We don't know what's happening, but he's having this internal dialogue where it's flipping the script, where she is now intentionally doing these things to hurt him and to make him mad. Well, why is she resentful of me? I mean, all of this was in his head. And when that got called out to me this way, this wasn't a new concept to me. Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, reading it this way, from the standpoint of the enemy that's trying to destroy relationships, it hit me in a different way. And I noticed those thoughts that I would have throughout the day about people I dearly love. And I had never noticed it before.
Wouldn't it be crazy to truly think, like, if we, because this does give you a vision of who the enemy is, like an actual, mm-hmm. like a person, a vision, mm-hmm. to think of how many times in our lives or throughout our day, if he was like, if you got to see him just be like, that's right, do it. Good job, girl. Like, throughout our days, thoughts that we have that lead to actions we do, like how often we would be probably so sad to know how we play into that plan so often.
Mm-hmm. And even listening to those words that then keep us quiet, that keep us out of what God called us to be, to speak in to people the way he calls us to speak into them, because we've already created this story and they aren't going to listen.
And these voices in our head, like your voices are different than my voices, because your journey through life and your upbringing and the experiences that you've had early on start to create those. I like to think of it as gaps. So the enemy has areas there he can sneak into your life, and they're different than the areas that he can sneak into mine, mm-hmm. because we've had different experiences, different violations, different fears. So, and he knows what they are. So mm-hmm. he just waits for an opportunity to go. Yes. But the voice in your head may be different than the voice in my head. It doesn't mean that we both don't have them and they play against us walking forward the way that the Lord is calling us to do. Mm-hmm. But the tool is different depending on the person's situation.
Absolutely.
And that's why sometimes in friendships, for example, I may not know that I've triggered a voice in your head, mm-hmm. right? Because your voice has come from your experience. And although I know you well and I know your experience, still wires that are in there, like I don't know all the triggers. So easily I could say something to you that then internal dialogue starts happening with you. And I don't even know that I've tripped that wire, mm-hmm. and vice versa.
Right.
Your triggers.
You're right, because those voices the voices we tell ourselves about ourselves do start when we're very, very young. And I've shared with you 2 thoughts that I didn't even realize I was operating out of, but that started when I was very young. One, I think we might have talked about it on the podcast about the poverty mentality, mm-hmm. how that was still reminiscent. And then another thought that I had was around there wasn't enough love for me. And so it changed the way that I operated with people, the way that I engaged with people. And I didn't even realize that was this subconscious thought that I was operating out of. And I realized I don't need to be in competition with anybody. Mm-hmm. And I've never felt like I didn't have enough love for my own children. Like, I can only love one of you at a time. But due to different reasons and different things, that was a thought process that developed early on inside of me. So it wasn't that I didn't feel like I was capable of it, but I didn't feel like I was worthy of receiving it.
Well, I'm super pumped for you to keep reading this book and telling me about it. And I probably should read it too. I need to start working book reading into my life right now, because it doesn't have a spot. But I'm hoping that they can even, one of the things you and I both say is Satan loves secrets. Mm-hmm. So the voices in our head that we're battling with, those are our secret voices. I mean, unless we say it out loud, and that takes some power away from it. Mm-hmm. When you and I are able to talk with each other, I mean, that's why we started it in the first place, is because we have been able to talk with each other about the different thoughts, battles that we have. And so we wanted to start taking it public so that these conversations don't have to be something that we secretly have. But so right now in the book where you're at, you're reading about the battle he's having internally. But I wonder if you voice it mm-hmm. and take it out loud and sit down and dig into it there, how much power, I think there's a lot of power lost, if not all power lost, that the enemy has on that when it no longer is just the thought in your head.
Well, that was one of the things that I thought was a great way to combat this. So first of all, what we talked about, acknowledging that it's there and calling it what it is and making the intentional effort to stop it. I was having this conversation with my 11-year-old in the car after their Bible study. She and a friend, I was taking them to dance. And one of the things that she said was, she said, but you can't help the thoughts that pop into your head. Like sometimes you're just going along and then it just pops in there. And I said, yeah, it does seem like that, doesn't it? And her little friend said the same thing. Like, yeah, it's like little bubbles that just pop into your head. I was like, that's exactly what happens. These thoughts pop in and you can't always control what pops into your head, but you get to control whether you keep thinking about it or not. And so how do you turn the channel so that you aren't thinking about that? And brainstorming that with 11-year-olds was so fun and so cute. And I thought, so impactful for your life. If you can realize this at 11, that's so powerful. But acknowledging it, sometimes saying it out loud, mm-hmm. even if you're by yourself. And then we talk a lot about gratitude. I think finding gratitude in that moment for whatever it was where it was starting to take you down a bad path. What's the gratitude in that? And how does God see that situation? Because the enemy's sneaky and he just keeps pushing you a little further and a little further away from where the Lord lines up, and he puts you more and more internally.
Because ultimately he wants you alienated.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Alienated, feeling alienated from people, like you can't connect, helpless, mm-hmm. frustrated. I mean, that is the ultimate goal. So the more that those thoughts can be worked on, the more that he has a grasp on those things, then you continue to be moving away from gifts mm-hmm. that we have, the people that we have, you know, our spouses, our children, our friends, like, because that joy is not his ultimate goal. That little man in your book that's speaking into him, he doesn't want him to experience joy in his life, contentment. Yes. He doesn't want him to get to know the Lord anymore. Mm-hmm. So therefore, he's got to keep trying to alienate him from people that are pouring good things into him.
Interesting. One of the things is mild contentment. Like if he is mildly comfortable, he's not going to be seeking the Lord, and he's not going to be trying to change what's happening. So no huge conflict. They even talk about how war can seem good at first, but stop getting excited about the possibility of a war because it can be very detrimental to their mission, which is to drive people away from the Lord. Because when things get really bad and really devastating and destitute, oftentimes we turn to the Lord then. Mm. So if he can just keep it mildly irritating. Mm. Oh, man.
You know, so the quote that just came to my head, it's one of my favorite quotes, and I try to tell myself this, especially when I get into a line of thought. It says, don't believe everything you think.
Oh, I love that one.
I mean, isn't that
so
true?
good.
I mean, that really hits on when we're creating these stories in our head. We start believing our stories as truth. And that quote, if we can keep it at our forethought of don't believe everything you think,
I think that might be the title of this episode.
You're right, because it's true. It's true. And I got to tell you, it was funny. Not very long ago, I texted you, and you wrote back and said, "I don't know. I don't even know if I believe what I think or something." You came back, and I was like, "I hear you, girl." You know, like that was
right.
Because, but there's a lot of power in not believing that your thoughts are truth.
Right.
It doesn't mean don't process and think and make conscious choices, but believing all our thoughts are truth.
Mm-hmm.
And forgetting that opinions are fleeting, like they are situational. And that goes with people around us when their opinions are situational too.
In thinking of how do we then change this, we've talked about calling it out loud, getting into a state of gratitude. One thing with our children, I learned with one of my daughters when she was in 3rd grade, I think, her teacher said, if she's having a hard time talking with you about something, write it down. Mm-hmm. And we would we had a notebook, and we would write things back and forth. And she felt so much more comfortable organizing her thoughts and getting them out on paper through pen than she did sitting down talking face to face. It was like she had a hard time processing her feelings and thoughts. And so when she had time to be alone and write them down, oh my goodness, her thoughts and feelings in her heart would just gush out on those pages. And I was so grateful for that advice, because she would even share, this is what I think right now. This is how I'm feeling right now. Very intimate thoughts. And she never would have said that, because you typically don't say those things out loud. So if you're trying to help your children with it and they just aren't talking, I don't know about boys, but girls sometimes will write it down instead. Writing it down yourself in a journal or on a piece of paper, and just writing down everything you're thinking and feeling that you don't allow yourself to process mentally because it feels so wrong or it seems so wrong. When you can get it out of your heart and out of your mind and on paper, then you can see how ridiculous it is sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's really great for marriages too.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have a partner in a marriage that one partner dominates and the other partner shuts down because they feel like they're not able to speak as well as the other partner, their thoughts, so their process, they give up. Mm-hmm. And so having an opportunity, or one partner shuts down the other partner as soon as they start speaking, so that they feel like they can't freely speak the way that they're feeling at that time. Right? Being able to write it down. There's two things that can come for that. One, the person can realize and start writing it down. They may see that, holy cow, like I got this wrong.
Right.
Like as soon as they're able to have that thought process, like now that I'm really looking at this, I've got this wrong. Or B, they're able to get their feelings out without feeling threatened by the other person, either shutting them down, interrupting them, or if they aren't able to at the time because they have emotional anxiety, they're not able to get that out. It is a good way to be able to share with your partner where you're at. And the opposite of that is not talking at all.
Yeah.
So although some people would be like, well, letter writing, that sounds kind of cheesy. Well, if you're not communicating about how you're feeling, so you either have writing it down or you have not communicating. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you which one is healthier. Like right away, you know, which one's going to take you possibly in the direction of things not working out anymore.
Right, because communication is the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Like our relationships are built on a history of communications. And when I realized that was a game changer in my life, the way I spoke to people. But we speak to ourselves all the time.
Yes.
So what are we telling ourselves and catching ourselves in that moment and saying, wait, I'm not going to make a story out of this.
Want to add one more thing, because I had a conversation with somebody who has been working with someone about the voices in her head.
Mm-hmm.
And her coach said to her, thank yourself, or have gratitude for having that thought or having that reaction. Because really what it was there's a negative reaction that's coming out that then gains, the payoff is feeling powerful, even though what it really does is it damages relationships. So thank yourself for having that reaction, because you have been able, it really has given you drive. It's made you a rock star where you're at, because you have this protective, powerful voice. So have gratitude for that, and then say, but it's not serving me well anymore. So this power of has, and the thing is you can even say, here's what, okay, Lord, thank you for this opportunity to learn that this is not serving me anymore. But being gratitude by hating on yourself because of the voices in your head. Again, that's what that little man wants.
Mm-hmm.
He wants you to be disgusted, even if you recognize the voices, but he wants you to be disgusted with them and be disgusted with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people that have negative voices in their head chronically have a lot of self-hatred. I mean, that's where different patterns of cutting, eating disorders, toxic behaviors come from this negative voice in your head, this chronic negative voice, and then being ashamed and angry. And so instead, being able to say, okay, thank you I see that it's gotten me here. I see that I'm going to be able to recognize this, and I'm going to learn from it. It's not serving me well anymore, and moving on from that. I don't know that I completely covered the gratitude part of it well, but yet truly being able to recognize that I can say, okay, I've got this. Mm-hmm. I see that there's a lesson to be learned here, that I can literally step forward and be better because of it. And that's part of that recognition of calling it out, finding gratitude in the moment, and then being like, and it's not going to serve me anymore.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing that came to mind when you were saying that was becoming aware of it as something outside of you, so that that thought is not the definition of who you are. You are not that thought. Mm-hmm. And even if it's a thought that you don't like, or that you do feel shame or guilt around, acknowledge that it was just a thought and you can change it. It's not who you are. So that's awesome. Yeah, that book has been fantastic for evoking those types of thoughts from a different perspective. So I've enjoyed it. It's different. It's weird. Sometimes the language is a little bit different, but it has already impacted my life and made me see how powerful my thoughts are, and called me out on them to a greater level. So I'm grateful for it.
Well, thanks for that topic. I'm excited. Now we probably won't talk about it again on the podcast, but I'm hoping you fill me in on our runs in the future.
I will. Thank you for joining us today. If you would like to learn more about our coaching business or some events we may have coming up in the near future, visit us at www.liveyourdesign.life.